Hello and welcome to today's presentation on how attachment impacts students in the classroom and how educators make a difference. My name is Scott Olver and I'm the Senior Psychologist for Student Support Services based at Felixstowe Education Office. So my background is as a clinical psychologist, and while I've worked in education for the past 3.5 years, before that I spent 12 years working in child and adolescent mental health. And my primary experiences were on a joint clinical and educational program for young people with significant mental health and behavioural challenges. And it was that early work with young people that I guess led me to learning more about attachment. So when I first started in this role with some very complex groups of young people, I was often surprised by how they behaved or how they responded to me. I was used to, if I smiled and made a reasonable request of someone, I was used to them generally responding positively to what was asked. However, with this cohort of young people, I got a whole range of responses, and they were usually not the response that I wanted. This might include young people who were virtual strangers hugging and invading personal space, or experiencing physical aggression and over-the-top reactions to really simple requests. And sometimes both of those things would happen in the same interaction. So clearly my experience of the world and of the people in it was not the same as their experience of the world. And that's what we're going to unpack a bit further today. So if you look at the top half of the slide here, and you see the mothers and the children having an interaction. And I want you to think about the students that you have taught in your classroom. And if your students had mostly had this experience of their parents and caregivers, think about how that might shape how they see you and how they interact with you. If their experience of a caregiver is someone who has nurtured them, who has dried their tears, who has interacted with them and smiled at them and read books with them, think about how that might shape how they see you. And then think about the child in the bottom half of the slide. And if this is their regular experience of their parents, people that are accusing and arguing and pointing the finger, and that's what they experience day after day, how might that shape how that child interacts with you in the classroom? So as we talk today, I just want you to think about some of the students that you've worked with, hold them in mind and see if some of the concepts that we talk about match your experience with those students. And hopefully as we normalise those relational experiences and as we talk a little bit more about them, we will be better equipped to understand how to approach the students that we work with in a school context. So as we talk about attachment today, and we talk about it within the context of school, I think it's really important for us to understand that there are some significant educational impacts to students that present with a range of attachment difficulties. So on this slide here, we can see that there are both academic challenges for people with attachment difficulties, as well as behavioural difficulties. So when it comes to academics, there has been a lot of research that has shown that students with attachment difficulties have lower verbal ability, lower maths ability, lower reading comprehension, and in general their academic achievement is lower, and that those difficulties persist right through, including at university. From a behavioural perspective, students might present with shorter concentration, be less engaged in learning tasks, less curious with their learning. And these findings hold true even when we control for factors such as IQ and self-esteem. So it's something that's about the attachment difficulty rather than some other factors. So what I've done with you so far is really just a bit of an introduction to the topic. So here's our roadmap for the rest of the presentation. So we're going to look at attachment. What is it and why does it matter? We're going to look at the 4 main attachment styles, how they develop, what they might look like in the classroom, and what you can do to support students who present with these styles. And then we're going to talk more generally about some general ideas for fostering attachment. Now, I want to talk to you as I'm a psychologist, so I want you to be assured that everything that we talk about in today's presentation is evidence-based. As a psychologist, we use a scientist-practitioner model where the science, the research informs our clinical practice and vice versa. and I'm more than happy if anybody wants any of the references to contact me and ask for them. The other thing I'd like to just sort of say to you before we dive into this too deeply is that attachment is an experience that we all have had. Most of us probably had mostly positive experiences. Some will have had mixed experiences, and a very few people will have had very traumatic experiences in the area of relationships. And our own attachment experiences shape how we view others and interact with the world. So tackling this topic is not a purely academic or learning exercise. So I want you to just be aware of your own responses as we go through the presentation today. And if this brings up some feelings that might get a little bit close to the bone, that I encourage you to talk to someone about those feelings. Hit pause on the recording and just take your time to work through it. So just as adult learners, do what you need to do to address today's content. So in looking at attachment, we'll start with a brief history, a very brief history of attachment. So attachment theory was first proposed by a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst named John Bowlby in the 1960s. And then his hypothesis and his theory has been further developed since then. He initially put forward this hypothesis: the infant and young child should experience a warm, intimate and continuous relationship with his mother in which both find satisfaction and enjoyment, the lack of which may have significant and irreversible mental health concerns. At the time, this hypothesis he put forward was heavily criticised as it lacked empirical evidence and there was no overarching theory to support his conclusions. However controversial this statement was, it was also equally influential, and it was from this starting point that he and others set out to explore the area further, and it sparked huge changes in practices in health, education and child protection. For example, it led to increased parental visiting, play, socialisation and even education in hospitals for children, as well as a move from orphanages to foster care in developed countries. Following Bowlby came a developmental psychologist called Mary Ainsworth, who developed a very famous experiment called the strange situation in the 1970s. And it was this experiment that led to the description of the main attachment styles that we'll be talking about today. These styles were identified through this experiment. And in the strange situation experiment, a parent and child would play in a playroom, being observed from the other side of the one-way glass, at which point a stranger would enter the room and shortly after the parent would leave. Over the next 20 minutes or so, the stranger and parent would go through a series of separations and reunions with the child, and the behaviour of the child and the parent were noted, as well as the child's exploration of the materials in the room. Following Ainsworth, subsequent researchers have extended the theory further, looking at how attachment behaviours emerge and change throughout childhood and into adulthood, as well as reviewing this model across cultures. So what is attachment? Quite simply put, attachment is the instinctive set of behaviours based on the child's need for survival and security. So when we think about the young child, an infant, when a child is hungry, the mother feeds him. When the child is cold, the mother wraps her in a blanket. When the child is scared, the mother picks him up and cuddles him, speaks soothingly to him, pats or rubs him on the back to reassure him. So that's the sort of the survival and the security. The attachment figures are primarily the mother as the main figure, but it's really anybody that can provide that primary mothering, nurturing response to the child and meet their needs. So it's typically close family members and caregivers, but also children attached to non-family members, so such as teachers and childcare providers, anyone who is in a sensitive and responsive interactions with them. And this is probably in the education system, especially true in the earlier years of education, where the child spends a significant amount of time with one or a very small group of teachers. So there is a powerful role for educators and schools to play as agents of relational development. And it is from these interactions that the child develops their expectation of how others will interact with them in the future. It's these early and repeated interactions that form the basis for future interactions. So what are the functions of early attachment? The main function to think about is that attachment is the child's best attempt to keep safe and have their needs met. An infant is helpless, and so attachment is crucial for their survival, both biologically, to receive food and warmth, but also in seeking psychological security, so settling those fears and worries. And I think it's really important for us to hold these behaviours in mind as a best attempt to have our needs met. And what is functional in one environment may be very different in another. So what helps a child to get their needs met at home may in fact have the opposite effect at school or in the community, where those behaviours might be seen as unhelpful or counterproductive to their goals. Attachment also provides us with a secure base to explore our world. It provides us with a defence against stress and trauma and helps us to develop our ability to self-regulate and organise our emotions. It creates the foundation for the formation of identity and moral development, such as empathy. And it provides us with a template for all future relationships. It is our model of whether we see other people as trustworthy, whether we see ourselves as valuable, and how effective we are at interacting with other people. So attachment is really crucial across all aspects of our life beyond those early years. So when we think about our attachment, we have two basic systems. The first is the attachment system, which is that instinct to seek proximity to a caregiver for comfort, support, safety, and to organise our needs. And then the other side of that is a need to explore and interact with our world, where we can seek to develop mastery when it is safe to do so. So we use that attachment figure as a secure base, so a base from which we can step out and explore the world, and also as a safe haven, someone who can welcome us back in when we are tired and distressed and needing some comfort and protection. And for a child to be effective at school, they need that secure base so that they are free to explore and take risks with their learning. So this description is best drawn out in the diagram here called the circle of security. So on the left we see a pair of hands, and we see on the top what we call the secure base. So that secure base is the base from which the child goes out and explores their world, engages in learning, and down the bottom we have that safe haven. So when the child is done with their exploring, when they're tired, when they're hungry, when they're upset or not sure, it's that the safe haven is where the child returns to be supported and to be regulated. So to give you an example of what this might look like, I think of my own small children, and it's probably something that lots of parents can relate to when you take children to the playground. And you let them go and they race towards the play equipment. And just before they get to the climbing wall, they look back over their shoulder at you. And what your face says in that moment will determine what they do next. So if they turn around just as they hit the climbing wall and they see fear and they see you stepping towards them to run and swoop and grab them, then the child will experience fear and will go, that's probably not safe. On the other hand, they might turn towards you and they see you encouraging. That's it, you can do it, go on, have a go, I'm right here. That will give the child that confidence, that secure base to continue exploring and that sense of, I can do this. Similarly, we often would see a child in a playground and they might be saying, look at me, mum, look at me. And again, it's how we respond to the child. Do we ignore them, keep our head in our phone, or do we interact? That's fantastic, you can do it, you're doing so well, how grown up you've become. Those sorts of interactions repeated time after time give us an example of the child having the parent as a secure base to explore the playground, but also as a safe haven and someone they can check back in when they just need that little bit of reassurance or comfort. So we're now going to spend some time looking at the different attachment profiles that Ainsworth and her colleagues have identified. And she talked about there being sort of normal attachment, both secure and insecure, but then also a type of attachment called disorganised attachment, which leaves the child at higher risk for developing mental health and behavioural issues throughout the lifespan. And while these profiles were identified as separate categories, I think it's more helpful to look at them as a continuum of behaviours. And what you might see is that people, while they might have a secure attachment, the sort of the main, most healthy form of attachment, you might see traits that look at some of the insecure ones, whether that's avoidant on one side of this continuum or ambivalent on the other side of the continuum. And when I think about my own children, who I would say are securely attached, I see traits from one side of the continuum with one of them and traits on the other side for the other one. So the research shows us that approximately 60% of children are securely attached, 15 to 20% present with an avoidant attachment style, 15 to 20% with an ambivalent attachment style, and 10 to 15% with the most unhealthy of the attachment styles, which is a disorganised attachment style. However, the research has also shown that within higher risk populations, such as lower socioeconomic communities, those that experience multi-generational trauma and unemployment, that the percentage of children that grow up with a disorganised attachment style could be much higher within those communities. And it should also be noted that attachment profiles tend to be stable across the lifespan. They can change, but that's sort of more of an intentional process. So if we start with the secure attachment, the best way to think of it is in that little quote at the top. I'm okay, you're okay, the world is okay. So the secure attachment forms when the parent gets it mostly right most of the time. Now at this point it's probably worth saying there's no such thing as the perfect parent or the perfect teacher for that matter. And when I talk about getting it right, even getting it right as little as 50% of the time is enough for a secure attachment to form. And the perfect parent or teacher does not exist. If we met the needs of the child 100% of the time immediately, then would we be setting up our child to grow and become more independent in the world? Would they foster their resilience? So we need to be good enough, we need to be responsive to meet the child's needs, but it's also okay that we sometimes get it wrong, that we sometimes take some time. The other thing to say about secure attachment is it's not the same as extroversion. Securely attached children can be both outgoing and they can be shy. So the securely attached child believes and trusts that their needs will be met and that their exploration will be supported when it is safe to do so. So it's a relationship that is responsive to the needs of the child, and the child doesn't need to check in around the needs of the parent. So if you think back to the earlier slide where we talked about all of the educational impacts of attachment difficulties, it's not surprising that children with secure attachment generally have a positive school experience. They can generally make and sustain friendships more easily. They can work independently, but are also capable of asking for help when necessary. They generally have positive self-esteem. They generally do better in testing. They generally have good emotional regulation ability, are willing to take on challenges and have a longer attention span. And as we move on to talking about some of the other attachment styles, this quote from John Bowlby is probably a good one to keep in mind. We're only as needy as our unmet needs. So the next attachment style to look at is an insecure attachment, and that's what's called avoidant attachment. And we can probably sum that up best with the quote, "It's not okay to be emotional." So this is an attachment experience where the child experienced the caregiver very much as emotionally unavailable or unresponsive. And the child has learned to not trust adults to meet their needs. So they then, into the future, don't believe that others can or will help them. And the child has learned that because the parent isn't very good at emotions, the best way to stay in proximity of the carer and to have their needs met by the carer is to not show their emotions. That allows them to stay closer to the carer. So if we think about the circle of security, and I've put a really small version on it just as a cue at the bottom of the slide, this is an attachment experience that overemphasises the top half of the circle. The exploratory system is strong. However, the child hasn't experienced the bottom half of the circle, that safe haven, that place where they can return and have their needs met. And it would be really important for us to think that while these children might not be showing us their emotions, they might not be expressing emotions, it doesn't mean they don't experience them. And there is some research that shows us that these children tend to mask their distress, and that when they have studied things such as their heart rate, they've found it to be elevated in stressful situations, even in the absence of a visible emotion. So how does an insecure avoidant attachment profile impact at school, beyond what we talked about earlier around the behaviour and the grades? These are students that may appear distant and disengaged. They will probably have smaller or no friendship groups, or they'll claim to have lots of friends, but when you probe a little deeper, they can't name any of the friends or the activities they do together. They're students that typically won't ask for help, or they'll hide their discomfort. They'll deny any need for support and seek to be really autonomous in how they operate at school. They may view others as untrustworthy or undependable, and they may see themselves as being too good for others. They're sensitive when the teacher comes into close proximity with them. They're likely to have a shorter attention span, not respond as warmly to nurture, and to value accomplishments more than relationships. So just as an example, I was thinking of a child that I've seen on a number of occasions within the school environment. And we would see with this child that, let's say they got hurt, they got knocked over on the playground, they scraped their knee, just something that might happen to kids from time to time. And when the teacher would go and check in with this child, the child would deny that there was a problem. I'm okay. But then what you'd notice if you watched a little longer is that the child would hold on to those feelings until they could escape, till there was no audience. And it was then, once they'd left the area or gone away from the others, that's when they would dissolve and let those feelings out and cry. And they wouldn't seek to show that they needed support from the parent or from the caregiver within the school, but they still had those feelings. And when it was safe for them to release when no one was there, that's when they let the feelings out. So what can we do in the classroom to support students that might present with this attachment style? Perhaps to think about, well, what is the goal of our work with students like that? It would be to provide them with an emotionally secure environment, that safe haven from the bottom of the circle, without spotlighting the student, without putting the focus on them that will make them feel uncomfortable. So this might look like, if they need support, providing that support within pairs or small groups rather than giving it to them individually. It's also about providing them with highly structured activities where expectations and processes and outcomes are clear. So thinking about our timetables and our lesson planning. And from a skills development perspective, it might be around emotion coaching. It might be providing language to put words to their feelings and to their behaviours. So when you do notice something that happens with the child, it might be using what I call an I wonder statement. I wonder if when that happened, what you were really feeling is this, or what you were really experiencing is that. And we always start with something like, I wonder, to create space for the fact that we could be wrong, and that gives the child an opportunity to correct us. But if we can start linking with the child the feelings and the behaviour and increasing their feelings vocabulary, and in non-spotlighting, really calm, quiet sort of ways, slowly building up their capacity to express and share emotion. We're now going to transition from the avoidant child to the more anxious, or what we call ambivalent attachment profile. So on the other side of the continuum from the anxious, insecure child is what we call the ambivalent attachment profile. And this is one that we might characterise with a quote, I want comfort, but it doesn't help me. In this case, the caregiver is likely to have been unpredictable for the child, nurturing and responsive of their needs 1 minute and unavailable for their needs the next minute. The parent might be fearful of the world and worried for the safety and security of the child. They may also not have confidence in their own ability to meet the child's needs. So therefore, the child experiences a caregiver who is inconsistent. And what they do is they keep this caregiver available to them through displays of emotional dependence. The child is also really tuned into the parent and what the parent's needs are, and are trying to predict what the adult is feeling or doing. For a child that presents like this, the world can be unpredictable and scary. And if we look at our circle of security diagram at the bottom of the screen, there is a real overemphasis on closeness and proximity and an underemphasis on exploration. So that bottom half of the circle this time is what's emphasised. The child uses the parent very much as a safe haven and shows a lot of behaviours on that side of the spectrum, but doesn't branch out so much into the exploration. So what might this look like in the classroom? This is a child that presents as highly anxious, maybe that's separation anxiety, an increased risk of attendance issues from school. They're going to have a shorter attention and concentration span because their attention is going to be more cued into the teacher or the caregiver at home. They're going to try to work to hold the attention of the teacher. They're going to be more dependent on teacher support, so these are not children that are going to take risks with their learning. They're going to be fearful of making mistakes. They might fear separation, so particularly with the younger children, the ones that don't separate well from the parent on arrival at kindergarten or school, and they're going to take longer to settle after separations or when they're reunited. They can also at times become hostile and frustrated towards the teacher, and they can have difficulty sustaining their peer relationships. I'll give another example of a student is in the classroom. This student is new to the school environment, had limited kindergarten experience, and within the home has a sibling with a major medical need. So you can understand in this case perhaps why the parents haven't always been responsive to this student's needs. And in the classroom, see a number of behaviours from the child. The child stays very close to the teacher. And if the teacher moves away from this child for too long, they will use a range of behaviours, including crying, hiding under the table, taking off their shoes and socks and then asking the teacher to put them back on. And the child, while their behaviour is disruptive, they're not a risk to others, but their needs are certainly dominating the teacher's time and attention. And this student is also really reluctant to leave the classroom to work with other support staff, or even to engage with support staff in the classroom. And this is a newer student, so the school is still getting to know the child and developing a plan. So what can we do in the classroom to support these children? In this case, the goal is to develop trust and confidence, so to develop that secure base by modelling consistent, predictable and responsive interactions. So we want to provide a secure base for the child so they can explore their learning. So this might look like when the teacher and the child do have to be separated because the teacher's supporting other students, that maybe there's a timer set up so the child knows that the teacher will be back to meet their needs in a fixed period of time. It can mean highly structured activities where expectations, processes and outcomes are clear. Ironically, that's one of the same adjustments that supports the students on the other end of the attachment spectrum. The use of transition objects to take the place of the parent or the carer. It can be those frequent little connections or check-ins with the student just to reassure them that they are being held in mind. And it can be about redirecting controlling behaviours to task or not the people. So to give you an example, once worked with a child that had some really severe separation anxiety from the parent. And they had come onto our group program because of the mental health and behavioural difficulties that had been repeated so often at school. And the parent literally could not leave the classroom. The child just would not let them leave. And over time, our focus with this child was obviously to get the parent out of the classroom and extend the length of time they could tolerate the parent not being there. And so what we actually had to do as the child became more familiar with the staff that were regular in the classroom, we used to borrow mum for 5 minutes to take her out of the room. But to help the child feel safe and reassured that mum would return, she would actually leave her car keys with him. And those car keys, that transition object, gave the child the reassurance that mum wasn't actually going anywhere because she couldn't leave, and she would leave the room and stay with us for 5 minutes. Over time, as the child had some more experiences of that, we were able to lengthen the period of time, and we were able to slowly transition the security object so that mum did get to keep her keys. And over lots of time, mum was actually able to leave the program for short periods of time and the child was okay. So the final attachment style that we're going to be looking at today is called Disorganised Attachment. And this can be summarised by the phrase, I'm frightened. So when we go back to that slide where we looked at the continuum of different attachment styles, this one's set separate to the others. And this is the one that is the real concern when it comes to long-term well-being and success. All the other attachment styles are seen as being within the normal range, but this one is certainly sits apart from the others. And I guess the question that I'd put to you is what if your only source of comfort was also your greatest source of fear? So we have a caregiver that is both frightening and frightened. Maybe the caregivers have been overwhelmed by their own needs and not available to support the child. And it probably is something that I should have said earlier on, is that this isn't about blaming parents for their parenting. These are parents that across all the different attachment styles that have their own needs and challenges, whether it was their own experience of parents that were unavailable or ill-equipped or scared, or parents that have had other stresses, whether that's physical health, mental health. Right now we're going through a period where there are people that might be really concerned about their financial and economic well-being within the home, going through their own relationship challenges. So this is certainly not about blaming parents, but it is about understanding how our parenting does impact the child. So what we've got here are children that have experienced a parent that might not be available to support their needs. And so therefore the child is not learning how to organise their emotions or to connect with the caregiver. The child is typically really reactive in a fight or fight sort of response, is easily triggered. The key focus for the child is their own safety, and they don't feel safe in relationships with others. They might see the caregiver as incapable and take over, so just like the little picture there where you've got the child standing over the mother cowering in the high chair. And these are children that are more likely to have had a history of abuse and neglect. So in the school, this can have a significant impact on the child's success and can at times be very disruptive for the rest of the class. So this is a child that's likely to be reactive. Their behaviour may be unpredictable, and it certainly may be disproportionate to the trigger, so that fight-flight response that we talked about. These children might have a very strong need to control their environment in order to manage their anxiety and fear. They will underachieve, they may be very distrusting of authority, and they're likely to reject tasks due to fear of failure, and they're likely to have really poor self-worth. So in the classroom, our goal with the disorganised attachment student is to reduce their fight or flight response, as when you're in that really heightened state of arousal, there is little capacity for thinking or for learning. So to give you an example, when I used to work on the group programs within CAMS, probably most of the students that we had in the group at any one time would have presented with a disorganised attachment profile. And certainly whatever you were doing at any moment, you were only ever seconds away from disaster. A positive game, a game that everyone's enjoying and happy and laughing, can boil over. Not necessarily because someone lost and couldn't handle losing, but just because of the big excited feelings that go along with having fun. For some students were unfamiliar, or they were misinterpreted, or they'd misinterpret the other person. A minor mistake on a piece of work and that work is screwed up or thrown across the room or the classroom upended. So that's sort of how reactive some of these students can be. So our focus in working with them has to be around safety, reliability and predictability. So we want to have really structured, consistent and clear rules and be really clear with the student around what things might be negotiable. They're students that are also potentially going to be really uncomfortable with praise. Well done, you've done such a great job is not really helpful. Instead, we need to keep our praise specific to the task. I really like the way that you did this. Really name what has been done well with the task. We need to separate the behaviour from the person so that it's not about you're a bad person, but it's about the behaviour that might have been the problem. We need to create some low-key sensory spaces or retreats. And we need to recognise that there are going to be ruptures to these relationships. And so we need to develop good processes for repairing the relationship. So once the incident has occurred, we need to focus on safety for the student, for others and ourselves. And then when things are safe, we focus on repairing the relationship, and then we worry about making right what was damaged. And many of these students will have had no experience of repair, so it will be new and scary, and it will take repetition. Because in the past, their ruptures have led to relationship breakdowns. So within school, these are the kids that are excluded and that do move from school to school, or friendship group to friendship group, or sports team to sports team. They have the ruptures but no experience of repair. So really take time to focus on good repair processes. And it might take a while. It might extend over a few sessions for the student to feel safe and to go through it, and for that repair process to become predictable. Other things that can sometimes work to support these students, and when we're thinking about calming an overactive arousal system, is concrete, mechanical, rhythmic tasks or activities can be soothing. So colouring, sorting, building, those hands-on manipulative sort of tasks. So that's the 4 main attachment styles. Those 4 styles probably cover all the students that you have in your class. Hopefully most of the students that you work with present with that secure attachment style, but we know that with any classroom you're probably going to see the whole range of different students. So I just want you to take a few moments now to just pause and reflect on what we've talked about today, and just think about where that might have linked up with some of the students that you've held in mind. So did some of the previous descriptions ring true for the students that you've been working with? How did working with some of those students challenge you? How did it push your buttons? How did you respond to them? What strategies did you use that helped? And then finally, what might you do differently now that you've got some of this knowledge and some of this way of organising your experience of being with that child? So you might want to pause the video here for a few moments and just consider some of those questions. So this next slide I've titled, What Educators Do, or What Educators Can Do, because I think that a number of these things, these strategies for facilitating and fostering good attachment, you already are doing. You do them naturally and intrinsically, and I'm just putting some words around it. So some of this might be stuff that you say, tick, we're doing, and some of it might be, oh, that's something that maybe we want to put a bit more focus on, emphasis on. And remember, as we talked about with developing secure attachment, it's not about being perfect, it's about being good enough. It's about being responsive and meeting the child's needs 50% of the time. So the first thing that educators do is they create a school environment that is a secure base for the child to explore learning. Because schools are primarily places for exploration and learning. So we need that secure base to be activated in the child so that they're free to go out and learn and expand their knowledge and take risks. So how do we create a secure base? We provide an environment that is predictable, consistent and safe. So school-wide we think about how do we develop that culture, that warm social emotional climate, how do we develop that sense of respect for students? And how do we foster a sense of security? So thinking about continuity of people, place and transitions. So that would mean for students that might have attachment difficulties, trying to identify a key teacher or a key SSO to work with them rather than a rotation of teachers and SSOs, so that they've got that ability to form a relationship so they know who's going to work in and support them during their support time rather than wondering who it will be today. Same, and we get this a lot particularly within primary schools and kindergartens, that continuity of place. As students get older, they transition through more and more different classrooms. So if we can help that sense of security by being in a familiar place and reducing the number of transitions, that can help. And of course, remembering that we want to build up our emotional piggy bank. So how can we have our positive language and our interactions with the student vastly outnumber the negative interactions? How can we fill up the emotional piggy bank so that when we need to make a withdrawal, we're not already overspent? The second thing that we as educators can do is not just the secure base, but also to develop a safe haven to create a sense of belonging for the student. Places and people where the student can return to when they are feeling dysregulated, when they're feeling scared, when they're feeling uncertain, when they've stepped out of their comfort zone by taking a risk and now they need to retreat. So that might be identifying a champion or a key person for the child. So this may be the classroom teacher, it may be a key SSO, it may be a wellbeing leader, it may be somebody else within the school that has developed a bond with that student. And that the role is to support the student to regulate their emotions safely and healthily. So whether that's the emotion coaching, whether there are some programs within the school that help children to understand their emotions and to develop their emotional vocabulary. This is about creating places where students feel heard, so listening to them, allowing them to debrief and process their experience. And it's not about necessarily agreeing or fact-checking them, it's about understanding the world from their perspective and making sure that they feel heard. It's about encouraging them to feel like they're part of the community and celebrating their success. And it's probably also about remembering that the teacher-student relationship, that students that have that insecure or disorganised attachment profile, they are going to be harder to reach and they are going to need more focus to build effective relationships. And what you might find, and certainly I used to find this in my work, is that there are certain students or certain types of students that you find really easy to connect with or easier to connect with, and other students that might push some of your buttons. So when I was working on the group programs with my colleagues, I did quite well with the students who were more externalised in their behaviours, who were more out there. But I had colleagues that were better with the quieter, more withdrawn students. I had the energy and the tolerance and the patience for those students who had bigger behaviours, and I knew that, and my colleagues knew that. But I also didn't have the tolerance or the patience for the kids that were so withdrawn and shut down that just needed that time and that quiet to process. But I had colleagues that were brilliant at it. And so we were able to share the load, and we were able to recognise when we were at our limit with a particular student, and we were able to sort of sub in and support each other. So not just think about doing it alone, but think about your whole team within your school and who are the people that can support you. And remember that school is a journey and that you are a step on that journey for that child. So while you may do things to create a secure base at school, while you may act as a safe haven for a child, you may not see the fruit of those positive outcomes for the effort that you have put in. And just to wrap things up, we're just going to take the quote that is really connected with the circle of security model, and that is, always be bigger, stronger, wiser and kind. Whenever possible, follow the student's need. When necessary, take control. And because you are bigger, stronger and wiser, you know what clear rules to set and what boundaries to set. You then enforce these with kindness. And within those boundaries, you encourage the child to experiment, to create and do as much on their own as they can. When you need to, step in and take charge again. So that's the end of today's presentation. So thank you for joining me with it. If you do have any questions or you'd like any of the references from the presentation, please get in touch with me. For me, this is also a brand new presentation that I've just developed this year. So if you have any constructive feedback or ideas or things that you wanted to know more about, please let me know so I can refine it in the future. I haven't had the benefit today of a live audience to road test this on and to sort of seek your feedback within the room. So please get in touch with any ideas you might have as well. So thank you very much.